I want to talk today about the male desire to ceremonialize his utility. I believe that the male has some kind of latent desire to justify his own extortion. And this can be seen every time a man, when asked to do something by a friend he might enjoy, responding proudly that he has to check first with his wife. And they'll say this in this bragging fashion, almost as if to boast about the fact that the price of marriage was his ability to have fun doing things he might enjoy. In his natural state, the male wants freedom above all other things, and the only thing powerful enough to even begin to compete with this drive is his drive to reproduce. In fact, I believe that man is in and always has been hindered between an inner conflict between his freedom and his desire for reproduction, the creative spirit versus the animal bull in rut, obsessed with nothing but sex and more sex. It is in the latter where the male mother need rests, and in the former where all manner of male adventure and discovery resides. The weekend with the guys, the muscle car restoration in progress, the man cave, the tools in a man's garage, the hunting trip. I mean, we can even ask ourselves, why do human men continue to hunt in modern society? A quick trip to any grocery store will give him poultry and fish and beef and pork. It is in fact more expensive to buy a hunting rifle and deer scent and camouflage and tree stands. Why does he continue to hunt? He hunts to simulate his freedom. He goes there for the quiet of nature, the quiet he will never get at home with his wife, or at work where he spends his time earning continued access to his wife. It symbolizes to the married male what could have been, what he gave up for the chance to reproduce, which invariably and especially in the patriarchal family unit requires the subsidy and maintenance of a female, and an infantilized female at that, which is no more developed than the children he garnered from her. It can be summed up in the following statement. You can start a family, you can find a wife, you can have some kids. It might fill you with some sense of accomplishment. It might even make you happy more often than not. But there will always be an unshakable feeling that you gave something up. Thus, the thinking man, the man going his own way, must ask himself what he really wants. He must make the choice, and in doing so, he must understand the great lengths to which society will go to tell him it is his mission in life to sacrifice for queen, for country, for family, forever, while admitting that society will not, in any capacity, sacrifice for him. And so the ceremony begins, and we will now address the romanticization of marriage, the pretend worship from society of the good family man, the mischaracterization and worship of the bond between men and women, etc. Understand that in the family unit, all things are made possible by virtue of the male husband and father. As I've said previously, any patriarchal family unit, due to hypergamy reassertion, will result in female sacrifice to society at large, other than reproduction eventually converging to zero. The family unit, being the standard unit of civilization, is no different. The female has traded her sex and reproductive ability. Hypergamy reassertion assures that this will be her only sacrifice that she will have to make. This is a simple biological function that will never and has never been equal to the efforts of the male. And so, just like marriage, female reproduction must be made to appear vastly more important than what it actually is. It is repackaged as the divine feminine, the power to confer life, etc. And I've even heard comparisons that the female has sacrificed as much as men have in the construction of civilization because she risked death in childbirth. And now it takes seconds to realize that such risk was always a varying degree of minimal. Even before modern medicine, the female body was designed to give birth. If women were unable to give birth and live through it in the majority of times, our species would not be here today. Modern medicine has simply taken this already minor risk and brought it down to zero. But either way, we should debunk this little myth here. So you're looking at a graph of life expectancy for men and women from 1900 to present, and it reveals that even in 1900, when death by childbirth was a much more frequent occurrence, we see that life expectancy for women was still fixed above that of men. And looking at another graph here of the rates of female death due to childbirth from 1900 onwards, it shows us that female death due to childbirth did not begin to decrease dramatically until about 1935, which leaves us with 3.5 decades of data where death during childbirth was a possibility for women and where the life expectancy for women remained higher than it did for men. I'm starting to become convinced that there is something in the male that has a need to over-exaggerate female sacrifice and accomplishment while downplaying female dysfunction and cruelty, possibly to mask just how much more he sacrifices than her, to make it appear as though it's a fair deal. I believe it is from this desire that decreased sentences for female criminals arise, abortion, postpartum depression, rationalizations when women murder their children, the mass adoption of a queen has no clothes attitude towards female accomplishment in the job market via affirmative action for women, referring to our brave men and women in the military in spite of the fact that only men do the dying, the trivialization of circumcision alongside outrage at female genital mutilation. All of these things, I believe, derive from a combination of male white knightistry combined with female entitlement mentality. You know, it's not simply women that cause this problem, but the men that are willing to make a comparison with a straight face between childbirth and getting shot in war or killed on an oil rig. It's the men that make comparisons like this that truly refuse to treat women as real equals with all the responsibilities that this implies. Common sense tells you that women are anatomically built for childbirth, but nobody can point me to the part of the male body that is built to take a bullet, and we definitely do not have any more of an evolutionary advantage over women in an IED explosion. Which brings me to my next topic, the pretend worship of military service, the mischaracterization of patriotism and national pride, and how it harms men. Civilization, as I've previously described, is nothing but hypergamy on a much larger scale than the matriarchal model, where a handful of alpha males get access to the majority of women. It is an exploitation of the male drive to procreate and a check on female hypergamy, but it is far from an elimination of it. We are still in the female herd, albeit a much larger one, where men are on the periphery and the female herd is protected by the male collective. Women are not expected to fight in war and have no inkling of what war really is. But they are smart enough in their own way to know that if it means that they might die by participating in it, that they will not do it. They will refuse to do it. The male, however, with his need to prove his utility, will too often gladly go to his death, so long as it's celebrated and he gets medals to stroke his ego. And if people pretend to respect what he's doing for his country while he walks about in his uniform, so long as there's enough fanfare and medals on his lapel, he can convince himself that he isn't playing a very deadly game he might not come out of alive. If he ever knew that society not only does not care about the possibility of his death on the battlefield, but feels entitled to it, he would never sign up for such a thing. If he ever knew that his country secretly thinks him a fool for being stupid enough to buy into the hoorahs and the patriotic fervor, he would never sign up for such a thing. He is an expendable resource, and this certainly benefits the whole of society. But it is the individual man that will end up more likely to die, more likely to suffer from PTSD. Society won't tell him that all the shooting and killing he will do in war will most likely leave indelible marks on his soul, or that society will forget his sacrifice real fast once he's done with his tours of combat. And they also won't tell him that he's more likely to end up homeless, or more likely to stick a gun in his mouth because he can't get over what he had to do to survive in war. Again, this male disposability is very, very good for patriarchal civilization, but very, very bad for the individual male. So that brings me to the next concept that I want to introduce, which is the evolutionary pussy pass, which can be given as follows. The use of evolutionary psychology to imply or uphold the status quo as opposed to gaining an understanding of evil psyche for the purposes of counteracting the parts of it that contribute to misandry and male disposability. It's not enough to say that men are disposable because of XYZ. You can tell us why society views us as disposable all you want, and we already know this. What I'm doing here is telling men to reject it and starve the system completely. Meaning that it is perfectly normal to speculate as to why unisex combat units would be disastrous based on the evolutionary protector instinct of the male for the female. But when one goes a step further to say that women should not in 2012 be required to, if they expect the same pay and promotions as male soldiers, to go into combat in gender-segregated units to fight and sometimes die just as men do, then that's a pussy pass based on evolutionary theories that will result in unnecessary male death. No amount of evolutionary drive is going to surpass an enemy soldier's prime biological directive to kill or be killed. The only instinct that reigns supreme on a life or death battlefield is the one to live, and enemy soldiers will put aside any reservations to shoot and kill a female soldier when it means that not doing so might cost them their lives. Thus, it is in the interest of men to either advocate for women to go into battle alongside of male soldiers with the condition of being segregated into gender-specific battalions, or to pay male soldiers much larger salaries as compensation for a much higher likelihood of deployment, injury, and death. I mean, a simple hazard pay incentive. Whoever shoulders more of the hazards gets more compensation for doing so. What we do by paying female soldiers equal salaries when they are not required to endure combat is to spit on the incredible risk and danger that men endure in defense of their nations. And I go even further in advising men to refuse to protect his nations, refuse to fight in wars completely. I'm not saying that you shouldn't know your way around a gun or you shouldn't know how to defend yourself, but again, defend yourself and nobody else. The only exceptions are, of course, whoever you choose, family, friends, so on and so forth. Now, this is my advice. You don't have to take it. But if you become a victim of the consequences of not heeding this advice, remember that it is on you. Nobody else is responsible for your need to see if fire really does burn you. And the same goes for work and what you choose to do with your money. I mean, not only does the danger of marriage and divorce and alimony exist, but understand that to reproduce with a woman today means that invariably you will have to take her on as some sort of liability in one form or another. I mean, if you wish to slap a happy little name on it and call it a traditional relationship, you can, but remember, bottom line, you will do the majority of the work, pay the majority of the bills, and all she's going to give you in return is sex, which you can get without a relationship, or maybe some children, which ultimately belong to her in the state anyway. Do not fall for the trap, my fellow men. Cinderella does not exist. She never has. Your little cupcake isn't special, and she ain't traditional when it comes to anything that isn't convenient for her. Let me ask the people in these traditional relationships how many of their unique little flowers were virgins when they met them. I guess that part of traditionalism got lost somewhere in the fine print. So I really gotta say for now.